All right, well, it is 8:30 and on Tuesday, May 24th, and I will call this the City of Lacey Finance and Economic Development Committee to order. It appears as though we have an agenda, a 4 item agenda. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
I would move to approve the agenda as published.
I will second that motion, and we have an approved agenda. First item on our agenda will be the 2021 year-end financial report. And with that, I will turn it over to Finance Director Troy Wu.
Great, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead and share a screen here. Normally I don't put presentations together for these, but as I was preparing all these agenda items, I thought there's a lot of words here for a finance guy. I better get some numbers up on the screen, so bear with me here for a second. So what we have before you today is the 2021 year-end financial report. We'll focus on the general fund and the revenue expenditure performance of the city. These numbers are still technically preliminary. They will be until we're through our audit, which hasn't even begun. But we feel confident that any changes that we may have will be minor in nature. Okay, well, we'll start off with the expenditures side of the general fund. And here are all the current expense departments. These are the services we provide citizens that I think they most identify with, your police, engineering, administration, which includes council, city manager, parks and recreation. You can see the side-by-side comparison between 2020 and 2021. We did spend about $1.2 million more than we did in 2020. If you think about what happened in 2020 in terms of everything really shutting down, that's kind of the main explanation as to the difference. And we also have a significant change in the social services. Smaller. All right. So kind of going through the details of what happened within the current expense fund. Social services, we had about a $1.3 million decrease. That's primarily related to the capital improvement pieces we did there at the hub. We had the federal piece, and we also had this expansion of the Lacey Veteran Services Hub. So we had significantly more expenses in 2020 when the bulk of that project occurred. So it's really a one-time difference within that department. I'm looking at police. We're showing here on screen a $250,000 increase. This doesn't quite tell the full story. We did move some additional salaries into our criminal justice fund. That's the 1/10 of 1% sales tax that must be used on criminal justice functions. So we had another $340,000 of additional salaries there. So in total, police salaries are up about $550,000. You'll see that in a later slide when you combine the two. I'm going to take these two at the same time. Public Works Engineering and Community and Economic Development Department, both are showing decreases. And really what's happening here in engineering, we just have a number of vacancies that cause salaries and benefits to go down when you compare the 2 years. In community and economic development, we have about $195,000 decrease. That's related to the CARES Act monies that happened in 2020 only. And then transfers out, we have a decrease or an increase of about $1.75 million. This is really related to the $3 million transfer for the police station, land acquisition, and design. So again, $3 million right there. So we'll combine the 6 funds that make up the general fund. The current expense fund there, you can see at the top, we just went through in the previous slides. Again, a $1.2 million increase. Overall, the general fund, all 6 funds netted to a $575,000 increase. Again, you can see the criminal justice fund went up about 856,000. Again, about 350,000 was from labor. We also had a $500,000 transfer from this fund, and we moved those monies into a capital fund in which we we invested in technology improvements, laptops, technologies for the police cars as well. So one-time transfer there. Community buildings. This is about a $442,000 decrease. In 2020, we replaced the HVAC system at the community center. It's about a $560,000 expense. So again, another one-time 2020 expense. Looking at the rack, those increases are primarily irrigation and electricity. So again, if you think back to 2020, when things were shut down, we weren't lighting the fields at night. They just weren't being used at the same level. You might also remember from the budget amendment that we had an irrigation meter that we weren't charging for properly. So that is now being charged for. That's about a $50,000 per year irrigation bill that we're now seeing.
And we had to make up a bunch on that, didn't we?
We did. It was back to 2015 or 16. So yes, 5 or 6 year catch up of those past annual water bills. Street fund, about a $268,000 increase. Again, if you think back to 2020, we shut down a lot of different programs. A lot of our summertime maintenance was paused in 2020 just because of worries about what might happen in the economy and revenue generation for the city. So we did shut down some of those programs and they came back. We also have a significant sidewalk repair. The Avonlea neighborhood sidewalk repair is in that number for 2021 as well. Capital equipment, we have about a $1.5 million decrease. This is primarily CARES Act. About $1.6 million in one-time CARES Act monies in 2020. So again, the theme is 2020 was kind of a different year.
You think?
Does that also include the vehicles that we were asked to do the early order on? They're embedded in these numbers in 2021 actually. So, or 22, I'm sorry. So what happens is we buy and replace vehicles and then we charge in the next year. So what you're seeing what happened in 2021 actually gets billed out in 2022 because we bill based on actual expenses for those functions. Okay, so we're not seeing those yet.
Looking at the revenues for the general fund. Overall, we collected about $56.5 million in revenues for the general fund. It's about $2.5 million higher. I'm going to break these out into various sections of revenues. All the revenues won't fit on one screen, in which we could see. So apologize for that. But again, $56.5 million in revenues, about a $2.5 million.
They won't fit on one screen.
They won't. Well, they'll be really small. What's that?
Is that a good problem to have?
I appreciate the diversity of our revenues. We don't have to rely on a single source, but.
No, if I recall, my first year on council, I believe that revenue was in the closer to 35 million. 37, something around there.
Definitely in the 30. Boy, is that 2012?
My first year was 2012. Yep.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it was even as high as 37, actually.
No, yeah. It's a big difference.
She's growing.
It is. So what you're seeing here on screen are the taxes of the general fund. We collected about $3.8 million more in taxes in 2021.
Well, can we just, I'm gonna take a look at
Yeah, let me drill down in there for you. So property tax, we had an increase of about $619,000. It was a little higher than expected. Property tax is pretty easy to project. I mean, we determine the rate and the assessed value is what it is, right? It's set in the previous year by the county assessor, but we had a lot of home sales. I mean, we know that's been happening last couple of years. So we did have an increase to delinquent property taxes. So I think as homes sold, those taxes were paid. Because we really only expected about a $450,000 increase to property tax. Between the new construction, the 1% and the refund levy was $450,000 increase. So a little bit more than expected.
Yeah, I remember we thought because of the refund levy that we were going to see, you know, something of a reduction in that area.
Yeah.
Or up.
Yeah, so a little bit, like I said, yeah, a little bit unexpected, but not, you know, nothing significant there. Sales tax, you know, almost $2 million increase. Throughout 2021, we had about an 11% increase of general merchandise. That's our single biggest source of sales tax. Pretty much across the board, all brick and mortar type businesses benefited by the mid-year reopening. You know, as people became more confident and restrictions, you know, it's kind of hard to remember last June or July, but stores could only have like 50% capacity. You know, that you were stopped at the front door, you couldn't go in. So by having that full reopening at the mid-year, you know, whether it be clothing, electronics, all those brick and mortar restaurants in dining restaurants were really benefited from that reopening. What's also in that number that you really can't see is the construction was down about 31% compared to the previous year, but that has since made a comeback. But throughout 21, we did have a 30% decrease to construction.
That's a really good number when you think about construction being down. Because it's always been I know you've been concerned about counting too much on that one-time revenue of construction as opposed to things like brick and mortar stores that'll keep bringing revenue. So that's.
So with construction down and numbers on the rise,
It's a good thing.
it's a good looking thing.
Yeah, would normally expect that. I mean, the concern is the reliance on the new construction, as Councilmember Greenstein said, because it's very volatile. A 30% drop is significant. So.
Well, it's volatile and there's a limited amount and we're running out of land, right? So they can only build until we run out of land. Then it's just whatever you can rebuild, but you won't have construction at the same level.
So, you know, when we made those changes to where, you know, builders could pay their permit fees at the end of the project as opposed to going into the project, are we seeing, so I guess that change was mid-pandemic. And so we're not really seeing any of that here just yet.
Well, that doesn't impact sales tax. As sales tax goes with the construction piece. So when the construction occurs is when we receive, 2 months later, we receive the sales tax. I haven't really noticed that in the permit fee revenues. So I'm not sure what impact that's had. I mean, it's looked pretty normal. In fact, I kind of forgot that we, allowed that.
Go ahead, Scott.
The change is minimal, as part of the agreement was, you pay for the developer, they have the option to pay later if they want, but they have to pay the fees that are in place at the time they make the payment. So if they pay it up front, they pay the fees that are in place that year. If they pay it next year, it's gonna, have the ENR construction cost index inflation rate. So when it's a really large fee, that can make a difference. So most have been choosing to pay up front as.
So it's
Pay the known entity, you know what it is today.
Right.
It's gonna be that plus something next year. You don't know what. So yeah, it makes sense.
Inflation like it is right now, I'm guessing they're all gonna be paying up front.
all right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay.
B&O tax up about 450,000. That roughly has the same basis as sales tax. I think a significant difference in B&O tax is the service industry has made a comeback from the reopening. A lot of service businesses basically had no activity in 2020.
Right.
So that's a significant difference there. Admissions and gambling tax. We're showing what looks like significant increases. Admission tax about 56,000 and gambling tax 188,000. But we're comparing to 2020 activity, which like admissions was almost non-existent. You had first quarter and that was it. So if you do compare admission tax to 2019, it was $136,000 lower than 2019. And gambling tax is only about 80% of the 2019 level. So we didn't see a full return to those two areas.
So just so that I'm 100% clear, what exactly goes into admissions tax?
Anytime there's an admission fee charged, there's a 5% tax levied upon that. So our primary taxpayer is the movie theater.
That's
So
what because when you say admission, I'm thinking movies, but I want to
Be
make sure.
movies, it'd be sporting events, concerts, if we really
we
had
had
any of
stuff
that
like
kind of
that.
stuff, but we do some of that. I mean, you had some
There's room
events
for
at St. Martin's
improvement.
or whatever.
On that line.
there is. Utility tax as a whole was up about 516,000. There's a lot of timing difference within these categories depending on when the utilities pay their taxes at year end and versus when we actually cut off the receipts of those, at least within the calendar year. Telephone, we've seen this trend for the last 5 years. I mean, that is that is the move from landline to cell phone, mobile phones, and most of our mobile phone bills are data, which we're not allowed to tax here locally. So
the Ethernet based landline. That because now that's a data thing.
it is data. It's anything related to data is there's a federal
Can't tax it.
law that says we can tax it. So yeah, we're gonna continue to see that decline. I think it's slowing down, thankfully, but that's probably not going to get any larger.
I think pretty much everyone who's getting rid of their landlines probably has by now, for the most part. That's why I don't think you're gonna see that much more decline. I mean, except for as older people die off, because no young people are getting, I mean. No one under 50 has a landline, right?
Looking at fees and service charges, overall, we had a $672,000 increase within this broad category. Licenses and permits, this is what we just talked about in terms of building permits. This is primarily building permits. We had a $256,000 increase within this area. That's really, a lot of that came in at the last minute. It came in December. We talked about this at your retreat where we thought we were going to have about $110 million of permit valuation, but we ended up about 175 million. It's really a single large permit that came in, but that's, certainly an indication of what construction is going to be occurring within Lacey. So that's all to say, I think construction is going to be, pretty much on par with what we saw in 2022 will be very similar to 2021.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of construction as I go to and from, like the 15th Street project that we approved in January 2020. They finally got tieback on the framing and stuff. And then, of course, those projects out in Hawks Prairie at the roundabouts are, all day, every day, which is great. And so I'm seeing, a lot of movement on projects that, some were approved a while ago, some are recently approved, right over here at Slater Kenny. Some of them are moving so fast, some of the fastest movement I've seen ever, I should say. And so it's very exciting. I like it.
Sure.
It's true. Those apartments over in Carpenter, those things are going up fast. You driving by that before they started building, you don't realize how much room there really is there. That's a lot more apartments than I would have ever expected could fit there, but it goes way further back than I thought.
That's real deep.
Yeah, that's going up fast too.
Plan checking fees up about 236,000. This is another indicator of future development.
Yeah.
Culture and recreation up about 248,000. Again, we're comparing to 2020, which was an all-time low. If we look back to 2019, we were still short about 465,000. So this is an area that's definitely slower to come back, but we certainly expect it will.
You said we're short, what, so we're only at about half of what we were in 19?
Roughly. Yeah.
But at the same time, so don't these numbers reflect, kind of a half a year, or
Mhm.
almost a 3/4 of a year, opening readjustment type situation? So
Yeah,
they're actually pretty good but then we're comparing them to a year where there was pretty much almost nothing going on.
Correct.
Yeah.
22 should be back to more normal looking numbers on that kind of stuff, because
Yeah.
things are back open. And I mean, there were still, in 20 we had no sports or any of that, all those teams that
Yeah.
that was all canceled. And in 21 it was still sparse. Should be back to normal now.
Intergovernmental, up about 976,000. This is all almost due to grants. And the number here within what's highlighted on screen is the Veteran Services Hub reimbursements. So one time in nature.
But can you go back to that last one just for a second? I'm seeing that, okay, so was it 2020 when we shut down the liquor stores and said, okay, grocery stores, you guys can do it? Or was that 19?
Oh, when they went, that was before 20.
was
That's
before
been at
20.
least several, probably
Hasn't
more
been-
like 18, 17, 18.
That'd be my guess. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm seeing that number is steadily on the rise. Is it?
Well, that's, so you're talking about liquor excise, liquor profits. Now,
Yeah,
those are statewide collections that are distributed on a per capita basis. And they're actually frozen in time back to, I think it's
18.
2 years before they actually made the change.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So they took a snapshot of what those taxes were and they put a cap on it. The reason we're seeing increases is because our population is growing faster than the state on average. So we're taking a bigger share of the overall state taxes.
The per capita amount didn't change, just just the number of people changed.
So miscellaneous, down about 1.2 million. Interest earnings, that's kind of the big explanation that's needed is we didn't have negative interest earnings, just to be clear. This is really an accounting function for market value adjustments. When you're in an environment that rates are going to increase, your investments that you're holding are going to decrease in value. So we're required by our accounting standards to actually account for that loss at the end of the calendar year, which is December 31st. At that time, everybody fully expected that the Federal Reserve was going to start increasing rates, which they obviously have. So that's almost all market adjustment. That's not to say that interest earnings didn't drop because we saw an overall drop to basically zero overnight rates. But we did actually earn about $267,000 of interest. So obviously not very different from that negative number. Want to talk about utilities real briefly. Basically no surprises. These increases you're seeing for water, wastewater, stormwater, those are all pretty much expected in terms of the mid-year rate increase. And we also had a really hot summer 2021. We had that week that was unbearable as far as I was
something
concerned.
like that. We got to 10.
We did hit some pretty high numbers. Yeah,
Yeah, we were hotter than Vegas.
it's unbelievable.
So
We don't need that to happen again.
Yeah, no, not anymore yet for this summer.
on the expenditure side for the utilities, again, nothing unexpected. When you look at the water utility, a $623,000 decrease, that really has to do with a capital transfer amount that was lower. So we transferred about $615,000 less, which explains that decrease. The increase in wastewater is due to the lot reimbursement. You know, we collect the lot fees, so we had about $885,000 more in lot fees. And then the increase in stormwater, again, has to do with a capital transfer. So we had about $670,000 increase into that capital transfer. So looking at just some summary comments. There's been a lot of changes actually since the end of 2021 to where we are today. You know, COVID, and if you think back to December 31st, 2021, Omicron hadn't even peaked at that point. It didn't peak until January. Now we're seeing most of the restrictions being lifted. I think one of the last ones is the Open Public Meetings Act, which is those restrictions are going to expire on June 1st unless something changes. So very different environment right now. Inflation at year end 2021, inflation for the Seattle area was about 7.6%. The most recent CPI was 9.1% and hasn't peaked yet. So you may have read in the news, the national inflation looks like it peaked because it actually went down in May, but Seattle's has not peaked yet. And that's pretty common. Seattle typically lags behind both in the decline and the incline. So I think historically it's been about a 2 or 3 month kind of delay, sometimes six months. I think the Great Recession, Seattle was pretty close to 6 months behind in terms of the actual economic numbers. So that's obviously impacting what we're seeing.
Ugly number.
What's still the same? Supply chain challenges. I just talked to Brian down at our fleet department and I just asked him, you know, we bought any vehicles yet this year? He said, well, not really, but we bought some mowers and some smaller equipment, but I mean, we haven't received any pickup trucks. I mean, so those supply challenges are still there and likely to continue for quite a few more months.
We know that dealers are still working on allotments. You know, they get allotted a certain amount of vehicles and then, you know, if you want one, you got to come put $1,000, $5,000, you know, down on that. Fortunately, some of the other supply chains, food supply chains are getting back in order. The people in the lumber industry are ecstatic because it's never been this good. Like literally that was a quote from a lumber guy, you know. So I mean, I guess we're all hoping that, you know, supply chains speed up, you know, faster, but then you also have the people saying, well, you can't get anybody to work and, you know, we're having employee challenges. But at the same time, you know, I was in an EDC meeting and more non-conventional businesses, startups happened during the pandemic than ever before. So people pivoted and found a way to make some money on their own. So we may, hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping we get out of this challenge, but
Everyone is struggling for employees right now,
yeah,
including us as a city. I mean, what do we have? 34, last I heard, there's like 34 spots unfilled that are budgeted positions that, you know, can't find people to fill them.
yeah.
But it's everywhere. I mean, you hear private businesses right now closing some, you know, who was it? That burger place in Grand Mound was all over Facebook. They were closing an extra day a week, just don't have enough people, can't open.
Yeah. When there's no work for a year and a half, almost 2 years, you got to figure out something and you figure out your own thing. Might go work for somebody else again.
That was my last bullet. You both stole my thunder a little bit, but that's okay. Yeah, obviously the tight job market. I think we lost about 22 million jobs during the pandemic nationwide. And as of April, I think 1.2 million still haven't been recovered. So obviously still a challenge there, which is impacting inflation. I mean, as wages increase to try to entice people to come work for you, you know, it's this push and pull cycle that we're seeing, and you know, hopefully we see the end.
Yeah, it's a really strange world out there for that right now. I know in my industry, if you want to leave a carrier to go to a different carrier, they're paying ridiculous, insane money that we've never seen before.
Yeah, a lot of headhunters out there.
Oh, I know underwriters getting jobs at 180 as underwriters.
Jeez.
That's, I've never heard of an underwriter making 180. It's just not a normal, I mean, it's a six-figure job, but it's typically low six figures, 100, 105, 110 maybe. 180 now with $50,000 signing bonuses at Hartford because they're just desperate for people.
It's either that or close doors. Or
That or don't
scale
underwrite the
down.
business, yeah.
If there's any other questions on the year end, if not, we can move on to the first quarter.
Okay, so let's move on to first quarter financial report.
Okay, I'll
Back to Troy.
be a little more brief because it's basically the same report, but 3 months later. So in terms of general fund revenues for the first quarter 2022, collected about or expended about $10.5 million. This is a decrease of about 203,000. The primary decrease again has to do with the Veteran Services Hub improvements. But I also need to point out that the majority of our labor groups have not received a COLA yet for 2021. So it's basically no change of salary to the vast majority of employees. And we have some unsettled contracts, we're still in ongoing negotiations. So there, again, no COLA at this point.
Once those are settled though, it would go back to the beginning of the year.
Yeah, expecting a retro pay and then obviously going forward. So I don't expect to be in a decreased situation in terms of expenditures, my message.
Yeah, not a chance.
Um,
Not with 9% inflation.
You do have the details in the reports. I won't, go into those too much. It really isn't a lot of surprises in the first quarter 2022 in terms of expenditures. In terms of revenues, the general fund collected about 13.2 million. This is a $3.4 million increase. But what happened in the first quarter is we received those reimbursements for the Veteran Services Hub improvements. So that was about a $2 million reimbursement. So 2/3 of that increase has to do with that one reimbursement. Property tax are, basically non-existent first quarter. People don't pay their property tax until May. So we're not seeing a lot of movement in property tax yet. Sales tax, we're about 350,000 higher through the first quarter. But what's interesting, we take the first 2 months of sales tax receipts and we accrue it back to the previous year because those sales taxes are actually generated in November, December.
Right.
So when you actually take those 2 months out of the first quarter, we only had a $34,000 increase or a 1.6% increase to sales tax. So definitely we're seeing a little bit different numbers in terms of truly looking at 2022. I'll give you a little preview of this month's sales tax. I just looked at it early this morning. About a 2.7% increase for the May collections, which is actually, or the May receipts, which is actually March. So when you think,
2.7 over last year.
yeah, May to May,
Yeah.
2.7. But if you think about taking inflation out of that number, if you take 9% out of that number, we probably saw a decrease to the actual sales volume that occurred within the region. In terms of B&O tax, we're still seeing that rise. Had about a $67,000 increase in the first quarter. Utility tax following that same trend of about $322,000 higher. Emissions tax, gambling tax continues to climb, but again, we're comparing to first quarter 2021 when activity was still very, very low.
You keep saying, where do we have gambling in the city of Lacey?
There's the one casino, where Chick-fil-A is?
Yeah.
Right over there.
Oh, right.
That casino.
Okay.
That's the only one.
That's okay.
Gambling tax also includes pool tabs, so the bars have pool tabs, but it's a smaller segment for
But
sure.
it doesn't include lotto or lottery
No.
because.
Because we don't get any taxes on that. That just fills the state coffers.
So far, first quarter, building permits are pretty much on par with where we were last year. In fact, we only collected about $3,500 more in the first quarter. Grant revenue increased about 1.9 million. Again, Veteran Services Hub reimbursements. Interest earnings, you'll see in the report, looks like it climbed $400,000 in the first quarter. Again, it's related to that market adjustment. So what we do is we reverse that market adjustment in the first quarter of 2022.
So I got a question real quick, just on building permits in that, you know, that one on Carpenter Road that Councilmember Greenside had mentioned, we had just recently annexed that. Was that not part of that annexation?
I don't think that's on the east side of Carpenter.
Yeah, that was part of the annexation.
Okay, so we had recently annexed it, and then once we received it from the county, we were able to collect building permits on it.
I'm not sure what the timing was on the permit.
So the annexation, if what I'm saying is right or true, then the annexation is somewhat paying off.
Yeah.
So to speak. Scott, you want to chime in on that? You've been really quiet this morning.
Yeah, so Deputy Mayor, that was a separate annexation. That was an owner initiated annexation separate from the one that we were, I guess, considered Lake Lois area. So they specifically wanted to develop under the city's development process. So they did a separate owner annexation. And so we've collected all the building permits based on that.
I like it.
Looking at the utilities, you know, no surprises on the expenditure side. I mean, you are seeing significant increases on the revenue side. And the reason is because we had a mid-year 2021 rate increase. So when you compare first quarter, there was no rate increase in 2021. So when you put them side by side, the 2022 numbers essentially have 2 rate increases in those numbers. So when you account for that, the revenues are coming in just, you know, as expected for the utilities. In terms of, you know, summary, you know, not a lot of different comments that we had from the year-end report. Again, inflation, you know, we can say that we don't think the Seattle inflation has peaked quite yet. You know, if you do look at sales tax, again, with the inflation in mind, we're looking at, you know, our general merchandise, our single largest source of revenue from sales tax, about a 1.6% increase from first quarter this year to first quarter last year. But again, if you take that inflation number, that very well could be a negative number. I also point out that we do need to keep in mind what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're increasing rates, and we had a 0.5% increase last month, or actually this month still. The market is basically, you know, they're pricing in 3 more 0.5% increases.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize that this is all to slow down the economy. I mean, we're trying to slow down the economy, so we need to kind of keep that in mind as we look forward, you know, the rest of 2022. The Federal Reserve wants people to stop borrowing money, and they want people to stop spending money. That's, you know, kind of the opposite of what we want, but, you know, we certainly understand inflation being a little bit out of control. But this is all to say we should expect a slowdown within the economy, which is going to impact, you know, sales tax, B&O tax for us. You know, and again, you know, we'll be watching the supply chain issue. We'll be watching the job market issue, certainly having negative impacts on inflation as we go forward.
Powell is a little more of a gunslinger than Greenspan ever was. And, you know, throwing out in a CNN meeting that, yeah, 0.5 point is on the table, and we're going to probably continue that trend for the rest of the year. So we're talking about 2 points and a quarter, potentially.
Yeah, I think our goal is to get to 3% by the end of the year, if not higher, but I think 3% was the last thing I read, and we're at 0.75 now, so we have a ways to go.
Yeah.
And then talking about 0.3, about 3 by the end of the year.
But, you know, as we look at the first quarter, revenues are coming in stronger than we thought. We're spending about what we thought. So, I mean, this is a good news report, but we'll keep an eye on things. And if anything warrants change, you know, obviously we'll come before you and make sure you have the information.
We'll just hope that with all the increases that we still get to have Christmas.
There you go.
Thank you, Jerome Powell.
So
As long as you don't want to travel, man, travel's expensive right now.
fuel, I imagine, pilot shortages.
We're looking at tickets. We're going to Costa Rica for Thanksgiving. We looked at, I rented this place 2 years ago. Tickets 2 years ago for Costa Rica were $800 round trip. Right now, $2,000. Round trip.
Is that gonna do it for the first quarter financial report, Troy?
Yes, that's everything I have.
All right, well, with that concluded, we will move on to our third agenda item, which is bond reimbursement resolution, and back to Troy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We're reaching a point with the police station project that we need to talk about financing and how we're gonna pay for that project. We have
Scott's writing a check.
We've come a long ways with that project, but we have a long ways to go. It's a little daunting when I think about it from my perspective. But the council authorized a memorandum of understanding with the Abbey to purchase property. I think it's about 12 acres or so. So we have that coming before us once we have the schematic designs completed and we know exactly what the footprint and what line adjustments are needed for the property. In April, the council authorized the agreement to have these schematic plans completed. So we're well on our way. So what we would like the council to consider is a reimbursement resolution. And what this does, so when you think about bond proceeds, there are tax implications with the timing of the expenditures of bond proceeds. There are a lot of different rules, but in short, you have to have all those money spent in 2 years. And that's going to be about a 2-year project to build. So what you are allowed to do is you could designate expenses that are spent before you issue debt to be reimbursed with bond proceeds. So it gives you a little bit of a head start on those expenditures, which gives me comfort and pressuring, Scott and his team to build faster. You just can't make those things move, right? So I'd like to give them a head start. So what's before you is a resolution that would delegate the authority to designate those expenditures, those reimbursed expenditures, delegate that authority to the city manager and the finance director. We do that through a certificate. This is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We've had the council specifically identify expenditures, but I think we need a little more flexibility this time, just in terms of the timeline and we don't know a whole lot about this project, and a project of this scope, I think it's going to change quickly. I would definitely recommend more flexibility. So
What's the timeline on closing on the land?
I don't think the schematic design will be done until fall.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So probably fourth quarter.
Okay,
But we're about to start writing checks for that design, and we have a 60-day window to pass this resolution. So what we're trying to avoid is arbitrage rebate. Arbitrage rebate is where governments like ourselves, we issue tax-free debt at a lower interest rate than taxable debt. And then those monies are invested, or at least they're assumed they're invested at higher earnings rate than the tax exempt rate. So we make money, so to speak. And if you don't meet those expenditure deadlines, you get basically taxed on those earnings.
or at least don't lose money.
Right, and this has been of little concern the last 10 years, is because we've been in a low interest rate environment, but we just talked about interest rates climbing. So when we're in a rising interest rate environment, that's where the risk of actually having arbitrage rebate occur. The city has paid arbitrage rebate, and we paid right around $47,000 on the bond proceeds for the city hall expansion in 2007, 8, 9. That's actually one of the first things that I worked on when I got here was that arbitrage rebate and paying the IRS. So rather painful to pay that. So this, I think this gives us a better chance of not paying arbitrage rebate. So in terms of what's required for this declaration, an official intent must be declared. It could come from the legislative body, so the city council. City council can delegate it, which is what we're suggesting you do. The declaration must have some sort of functional description of the project. So we have to talk about design, land acquisition, construction of the police station. And we actually have to declare the amount of debt we expect to issue. So the declaration will be, the police station, land acquisition, design, construction, with an intended amount of $40 million. So that's, we'll do that in form of certificate if the council does choose to delegate that to the city manager and the finance director.
Do we also have to declare a timeline or a schedule?
No. Okay. Those are all really guided by IRS regulations. So once you declare expenditures to be reimbursed, you basically have 3 years to issue that debt. So what this resolution does not do, it does not authorize the issuance of debt. It does not authorize or obligate the city to spend those capital dollars. This is really just to allow us to designate these expenditures as being reimbursed. The capital project expenditures will be authorized by the city council in terms of budget action, and we cannot issue debt without the city council authorizing that by ordinance. So this in no way authorizes or obligates the city to either one of those. So the recommendation would be that you move this on by motion to the city council. That would.
So you need a motion for us to move this to the full city council. I would move that we send this to the full city council with our recommendation of approval.
I'll second. All right, well, it's been moved and seconded. I don't think there's anybody here who can oppose.
We still have to vote. Okay,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
So we're ready for the
When do you expect that to come before us?
the next council meeting, so June.
Oh,
June 2nd.
right away. Okay.
That's gonna be a really full schedule that day.
Isn't that that's the hearing examiner report, isn't it that day?
I
Yeah.
believe so. And that's also
Yeah, it's gonna
the
be
tree
that's gonna be a
ordinance.
long meeting.
The whole, everything goes into June 2nd. Hopefully it's some warm weather. And
May want to
some,
wear your pajamas. You're gonna be here a while.
yep, bring some coffee. Okay, is that all that we have on that agenda item, the bond reimbursement resolution agenda item?
Yes.
Okay, then we will move on to the local revitalization financing program update. And once again, we have tried.
Sure, so this is a briefing for the finance committee, so in short, the city of Lacey is about to forfeit its $500,000 per year funding for debt through the local revitalization financing program. So the requirements to receive this tax credit, so this is a statewide, or the state portion of sales tax would be credited for the $500,000. The deadline is June 1st, so just about a week out for before this expires. So the requirements would be, we would have had to have debt issued on the Gateway project, which we have not issued debt. So that's the main reason. But you also have to, council would have had to pass the sales tax ordinance, basically a sales tax increase ordinance, all before June 1st. Otherwise, we forfeit those fundings. So that's the long and short of it. We're not going to meet the deadline, unfortunately. So it's been a 12-year process, certainly, bittersweet.
Yeah.
But in the end, you need the development to occur in order for this funding to happen, so.
But if I understand it correctly, with the direction the tribe is looking to go, this really doesn't, there's really no point to it anymore. Because they're looking to, trust land, so this really doesn't.
They're already working on that portion and have already submitted. All that DOT road work that happened, is that something that we're gonna be responsible for? Is that?
You mean the long?
Yeah, because that was part of, hey, this is gonna happen and they got in there and helped us out and I didn't know how that.
No.
Well,
Scott,
yeah, the frontage road there. So there are conditions at what point the entryways in and out of the development can occur. And obviously those points are fixed and they will not change. The tribe, even if it were to go into trust, doesn't have the authority to change that because that's dictated by FHWA, the DOT. So, and then in terms of when those open and close, part of the agreement was based on what point of development and regional traffic there. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously that was all paid for through the state, part of that state project, which Lacey gallons for the interchange justification for it. Now it's just static until.
Till something develops there and we're not on the hook for any costs on that.
Correct.
I was just wondering. We're almost done. Okay. Is that all you have on that?
Yeah, unless you have any questions. Just wanted to make sure that you were aware before it actually occurred.
Well, with that, we have reached the end of our agenda for this Tuesday, May 24th, City of Lacey Finance and Economic Development Committee. And if there's nothing more, then I will call this meeting adjourned.
Good. Scott, what do you want to do as far as our meeting?
Do you mind if we do a Zoom meeting?
Yeah, that's fine.
We actually could do it at this because general government was canceled, so
We'll do it now.
do you want to have your iPad?
Thank you, everyone.